Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we venture into the frozen frontier of terror with 8 of the most disturbing true Alaskan missing tourist horror stories ever documented. These harrowing testimonies emerge not from fiction or hearsay, but from meticulously investigated disappearances that have left both authorities and families searching for answers in America's last wilderness. Each account exposes the unforgiving nature of Alaska's remote landscapes, where tourists seeking adventure instead found themselves vanishing without explanation into the vast tundra, treacherous mountains, and endless stretches of Arctic wilderness. The evidence has been carefully gathered from official reports, witness statements, and search and rescue documentation, guaranteeing that every detail remains grounded in verifiable fact, though certain personal identifiers have been altered to respect the privacy of those affected. If you have not yet become part of our dedicated community of true horror followers, please subscribe to Buried Files and enable the notification bell so you never miss an episode when we explore the darkness that lurks in our world. Make sure to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on these cases or any experiences you may have had in Alaska's remote wilderness. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. The final text message from Dr. Marites Buenafe arrived at her family's phones at exactly 7:35 in the morning on July 1st, 2025. The 62-year-old physician from Lexington, Kentucky had typed out her plans with the methodical precision that characterized everything she did. She was taking the Mount Roberts tramway to the summit and would hike the popular Gold Ridge to Gastineau Peak Trail, a moderately challenging 4-mile route that promised spectacular views of Juneau and the surrounding wilderness. Her message was cheerful and confident, signed off with her characteristic optimism about the adventure that lay ahead. She had no way of knowing that those words would become the last communication her loved ones would ever receive from her. Dr. Buenafe had been traveling aboard the Norwegian Bliss cruise ship as part of a week-long Alaska expedition that had departed from Seattle, fulfilling a lifelong dream of exploring America's final frontier. She was not traveling alone on the cruise itself, having been accompanied by 2 family members who shared her passion for outdoor adventures and natural beauty. However, she had chosen to tackle this particular hike solo, confident in her abilities as an experienced outdoorswoman who had spent decades building the physical fitness and mental toughness required for challenging wilderness excursions. Her colleagues at UK Healthcare knew her as someone who approached both medicine and mountaineering with the same careful preparation and unwavering determination. The Mount Roberts tramway represented the perfect starting point for Dr. Buenafe's planned adventure, whisking visitors from Juneau's downtown area up 1,800 feet to a scenic overlook that served as the gateway to some of southeastern Alaska's most spectacular hiking opportunities. The tramway had been operating since 1996, providing safe and reliable access to trails that would otherwise require grueling climbs through dense temperate rainforest. From the summit station, hikers could choose from several well-marked routes that ranged from easy nature walks suitable for cruise passengers wearing street clothes to challenging backcountry treks that demanded proper equipment and wilderness experience. Security cameras captured Dr. Buenafe's arrival at the tramway's upper terminal around 7:30 that morning, showing her departing the visitor center buildings with the confident stride of someone who had done this type of hiking many times before. She appeared well prepared for the expedition, wearing appropriate outdoor clothing and carrying what seemed to be adequate supplies for the planned 4-hour round-trip hike. The weather conditions that morning were typical for southeast Alaska in early July. Cloudy skies with intermittent drizzle and temperatures in the mid-50s. Exactly the type of conditions that experienced Alaska hikers learn to expect and prepare for during the brief summer season. The Gold Ridge to Gastineau Peak trail that Dr. Buenafé had chosen was described by hiking websites as moderately challenging but extremely popular among both locals and tourists who wanted to experience Alaska's wilderness without venturing too far from civilization. The trail gained approximately 900 feet of elevation over its 4-mile length, winding through subalpine meadows filled with wildflowers during the summer months before reaching exposed ridgeline areas that offered panoramic views of the Gastineau Channel, Douglas Island, and the ice-capped peaks of the Coast Range. On clear days, hikers could see for dozens of miles in every direction, but the frequent clouds and precipitation that characterized southeast Alaska's maritime climate often limited visibility to just a few hundred yards. The Norwegian Bliss was scheduled to depart Juneau at 1:30 that afternoon, giving Dr. Buenafé what should have been ample time to complete her planned hike and return to the ship. Cruise itineraries typically build in generous margins for passenger excursions, understanding that weather delays and other unforeseen circumstances can affect timing. However, when 1:30 arrived without any sign of Dr. Buenafé, ship personnel began the standard protocols for passengers who failed to return by the all-aboard deadline. They attempted to contact her through the ship's public address system and tried calling her cell phone, but received no response to either method of communication. By 3:15 that afternoon, with the Norwegian Bliss already departed from Juneau and Dr. Buenafé still missing, her family members contacted local authorities to report her disappearance. The Alaska State Troopers immediately launched a comprehensive search and rescue operation, coordinating with multiple agencies that had extensive experience in southeast Alaska's challenging terrain. Juneau Mountain Rescue, widely regarded as one of the most skilled volunteer search and rescue organizations in the state, deployed their most experienced teams to begin systematic ground searches along the trail Dr. Buenafé had planned to hike. The initial search efforts benefited from the long daylight hours of early July, when Juneau experiences nearly 19 hours of usable light each day. Ground teams equipped with specialized equipment began hiking the Gold Ridge Trail in both directions, looking for any signs that Dr. Buenafé had passed through the area or encountered difficulties along the route. Search and rescue dogs trained to detect human scent were brought in from Southeast Alaska Dogs for organized ground search, a volunteer organization that had participated in dozens of successful rescues throughout the region. The dogs would prove crucial in search operations, as their sensitive noses could detect traces of human presence that might be invisible to even the most experienced human searchers. Aerial searches began almost immediately, utilizing both Alaska State Trooper helicopters and aircraft from the United States Coast Guard that were specially equipped for search and rescue operations in Alaska's demanding conditions. The helicopters carried thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting body heat through forest canopies and cloud cover, technology that had proven successful in previous search operations throughout southeast Alaska. However, the weather conditions that had been merely unpleasant for hiking became serious obstacles for aerial searches, with low clouds and intermittent precipitation limiting visibility and making it dangerous for aircraft to operate at low altitudes in the mountainous terrain. The search operation expanded dramatically on the second day, with more than a dozen professional volunteers from Juneau Mountain Rescue joining Alaska State Troopers and Juneau Police Department officers in an extensive grid search that utilized drones, additional search dogs, and expanded ground teams. The searchers methodically covered every accessible area along the planned hiking route, looking not only for Dr. Buenafé herself, but for any equipment, clothing, or other signs that might indicate what had happened during her hike. Despite these exhaustive efforts, the teams found no trace of the missing physician, a result that was both frustrating and increasingly ominous as the hours turned into days. Weather conditions continued to hamper the search efforts throughout the second and third days. with low clouds and rain limiting the effectiveness of both ground and aerial teams. Southeast Alaska's maritime climate can change rapidly, and what had begun as merely cloudy conditions on the morning of Dr. Buenafe's hike deteriorated into the type of weather that makes wilderness travel treacherous, even for experienced outdoors people. The combination of wet conditions, limited visibility, and steep terrain created hazardous conditions for the searchers themselves, forcing search coordinators to balance the urgent need to find Dr. Buenafe against the safety of the dozens of people risking their lives to locate her. The breakthrough came on Thursday morning, July 4th, when the crew of an Alaska Army National Guard helicopter spotted something unusual approximately 1,700 feet below the Gold Ridge ridgeline. Using specialized equipment and flying techniques developed specifically for Alaska's challenging search and rescue environment, the helicopter crew was able to confirm that they had located Dr. Buenafe's body in an area that would have been extremely difficult for ground searchers to access safely. The location was far below the established hiking trail, suggesting that she had either fallen or become disoriented and wandered off the marked route during her attempted hike. The recovery operation required careful coordination between Alaska State Troopers, Juneau Mountain Rescue, Temsco helicopters, and the Alaska Army National Guard, utilizing specialized high-angle rescue techniques to safely retrieve Dr. Buenafe's body from the remote location where she had been found. The challenging terrain and continued poor weather conditions made the recovery operation nearly as dangerous as the original search had been, demonstrating the extreme difficulties that face anyone who ventures into Southeast Alaska's wilderness areas without proper preparation and support. The successful recovery was a testament to the skill and dedication of Alaska's search and rescue community. But it came too late to save Dr. Buenafe's life. Dr. Buenafe's body was transported to the Alaska State Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy that would determine the exact cause of her death, though the circumstances of her discovery suggested that she had likely fallen from the ridge area during her attempted hike. The investigation would examine whether weather conditions, equipment failure, medical emergency, or other factors had contributed to the tragedy that claimed the life of a skilled physician who had simply wanted to experience the natural beauty of Alaska during her vacation. Her death served as a sobering reminder that even experienced hikers can encounter unexpected dangers in Alaska's wilderness areas, where rescue may be hours or days away and where weather conditions can change from pleasant to life-threatening in a matter of minutes. The loss of Dr. Marites Buenafe deeply affected not only her family and colleagues at UK Healthcare, but also the broader community of outdoor enthusiasts who recognized that her tragedy could have befallen any of them under similar circumstances. Norwegian Cruise Line expressed their condolences and provided support to her family through their crisis response team, while the various search and rescue organizations reflected on lessons learned that might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Dr. Buenafe's death highlighted the inherent risks that exist whenever people venture into Alaska's wilderness areas, no matter how well prepared or experienced they might be, and served as a reminder that the mountains and forests of the last frontier demand constant respect and vigilance from those who seek to explore their beauty. The June afternoon when Joseph Balderas disappeared from Nome, Alaska was supposed to mark the beginning of his new life in America's final frontier. At 36 years old, the Texas native had driven over 3,000 miles to reach this remote settlement perched on the edge of the Bering Sea, leaving behind the suffocating heat of Houston for the promise of adventure and opportunity in the last frontier. His girlfriend Megan Ryder had followed him just 2 weeks later, their hearts full of dreams about building a future together in a place where the summer sun barely set and the winter aurora painted the sky in impossible colors. Joseph had secured work with a local construction company that specialized in maintaining the harsh infrastructure needed to survive in subarctic conditions. The pay was excellent, nearly double what he had earned back in Texas, and the housing was surprisingly affordable for a man accustomed to big city prices. Nome might have been isolated, accessible only by small aircraft or seasonal barge, but it offered something Houston never could: the chance to be part of a tight-knit community where everyone knew your name and your neighbors would risk their lives to help you survive the brutal winters that claimed the unprepared. Megan had been more hesitant about the move, concerned about leaving her teaching job and the family they had known all their lives. But Joseph's enthusiasm proved contagious, and his detailed phone calls describing the stunning landscapes and genuine warmth of the locals gradually won her over. He talked about hiking the tundra that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, about learning to pan for gold in the creeks where prospectors had struck it rich over a century ago, about the incredible silence that settled over the land when the wind stopped blowing. In his letters, he painted pictures of a place where they could truly start fresh, away from the complications and disappointments that had followed them in Texas. The couple had been planning their engagement for months, with Joseph intending to propose during the brief summer when Nome transformed from a snow-covered outpost into a bustling hub of mining activity and tourism. He had already picked out a ring from one of the local jewelry stores, a simple band embedded with genuine Alaskan gold that would symbolize their new beginning in this incredible wilderness. Their wedding would be small and intimate, perhaps held on the beach where the Bering Sea met the tundra, with the midnight sun providing natural illumination for their ceremony. On June 24th, Joseph set out alone for what was supposed to be a short hiking expedition into the tundra northeast of Nome. He had been planning the trip for days, studying topographical maps with local residents who warned him about the deceptive nature of the landscape, where gentle rolling hills could quickly give way to treacherous bogs and hidden creeks. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the mid-60s, perfect conditions for exploring the wildflowers that carpeted the Arctic plains during the brief summer season. He carried a fully stocked backpack with emergency supplies, a GPS unit, and enough food and water for 2 days, even though he planned to return by evening. Megan was working her first shift at the local elementary school, helping with their summer reading program when Joseph kissed her goodbye that morning. He promised to be back in time for dinner, excited to share whatever discoveries he might make during his exploration of their new homeland. She remembers him standing in their tiny apartment doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder, his face bright with the kind of anticipation she had not seen since they were teenagers planning their first camping trip together. That image would haunt her for years afterward. Joseph silhouetted against the endless Arctic daylight, waving goodbye with no idea he would never return home. When Joseph failed to appear by midnight, Megan began making phone calls to his co-workers and the few local friends they had begun to cultivate. Nome operated on a different schedule during the summer months, with many residents staying active well into the traditional nighttime hours, taking advantage of the perpetual daylight to accomplish tasks that would be impossible during the dark winter months. But nobody had seen Joseph since he left town that morning, and his cell phone went straight to voicemail, suggesting he was either in an area with no coverage or his battery had died. The Nome Police Department launched a search operation at dawn the next day, coordinating with Alaska state troopers and local volunteer search and rescue teams who knew the surrounding terrain better than anyone. They found Joseph's backpack approximately 8 miles northeast of town, sitting upright against a small boulder as if he had carefully placed it there before walking away. The backpack contained all of his supplies: food, water, emergency shelter, first aid kit, even his wallet and identification. The only items missing were the clothes he had been wearing and the small digital camera he always carried to document their Alaskan adventures. What disturbed the search teams most was the complete absence of any trail leading away from the backpack. The tundra around Nome preserves footprints remarkably well during the summer months, when the permafrost creates a solid base beneath the surface vegetation. Joseph's tracks were clearly visible, leading to the spot where they found his pack, but there were no footprints indicating which direction he might have traveled afterward. The search dogs brought in from Anchorage lost his scent at the same location, as if he had simply vanished into the thin Arctic air. As the search expanded to cover over 50 square miles of tundra, Megan began learning about Nome's dark history of unexplained disappearances. Local residents, initially reluctant to discuss the subject with outsiders, gradually opened up about the 24 people who had vanished from the area between 1960 and 2004. Most of the missing were men between the ages of 20 and 40, many of them newcomers to Alaska, who had come north seeking work or adventure just like Joseph. The FBI had investigated these disappearances extensively but never found evidence of foul play, concluding that the harsh environment and isolation were the most likely explanations. The revelation that Joseph was not Nome's first unexplained disappearance sent shockwaves through the small community and created deep divisions among residents. Some believed that discussing the missing people would damage Nome's reputation and hurt the tourism industry that provided crucial seasonal income. Others argued that the families deserved answers and that ignoring the pattern would only put more lives at risk. Longtime residents whispered about everything from serial killers to supernatural forces, while newer arrivals like Megan demanded thorough investigations and accountability from law enforcement. Megan threw herself into researching every detail of the previous disappearances, spending countless hours at the Nome Library and interviewing elderly residents who remembered the earlier cases. She discovered disturbing patterns. Many of the missing had been described as experienced outdoorsmen who should have known how to survive in the wilderness. Several had left behind personal belongings in locations where they seemed to have vanished without explanation, and almost none of the bodies had ever been recovered despite extensive searches. The lack of physical evidence was particularly troubling in a landscape where human remains should be preserved by the cold, dry conditions. The search for Joseph continued for 3 weeks, utilizing helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, trained search dogs, and dozens of volunteers who combed every accessible square mile of tundra around Nome. Alaska State Troopers brought in specialized equipment designed for Arctic conditions, including ground-penetrating radar that could detect buried objects beneath the permafrost. The Coast Guard searched the coastline in case Joseph had somehow made his way to the Bering Sea, while local pilots flew grid patterns over the vast wilderness that stretched toward Siberia. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no trace of Joseph was ever found. As summer turned to autumn and the search was officially suspended, Megan faced the devastating reality that she might never know what happened to the man she had planned to marry. The stress of the disappearance and the community tensions it had created made staying in Nome unbearable, but leaving felt like abandoning Joseph to whatever fate had befallen him in the unforgiving wilderness. She struggled with guilt over not insisting on accompanying him that final morning, wondering if her presence might have prevented the tragedy or at least provided answers about what had occurred in those crucial moments when he disappeared. The case attracted national attention when podcast investigator Payne Lindsay arrived in Nome years later to examine both Joseph's disappearance and the subsequent vanishing of Florence Okpialuk in 2020. His investigation revealed the deep mistrust and paranoia that had infected the community, with residents reluctant to share information and law enforcement agencies sometimes working at cross purposes. The attention brought new scrutiny to Nome's history of missing persons, but also intensified the divisions that had been tearing the town apart since Joseph first walked into the tundra and vanished without explanation. Today, Joseph's disappearance remains one of Alaska's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a reminder of how quickly the frontier can reclaim those who underestimate its power. Megan eventually returned to Texas, but she continues to advocate for missing persons cases and maintains hope that someday the tundra will reveal its secrets and provide the closure that has eluded her for so many years. Joseph's story serves as a sobering warning for anyone tempted by Alaska's beauty to remember that the last frontier demands respect, preparation, and an understanding that some who venture into its embrace are never allowed to leave. The morning of October 16, 1972 dawned clear and cold across south-central Alaska, with the first hints of winter already painting the mountaintops in pristine white. At Anchorage International Airport, a small Cessna 310C bearing tail number N1812H sat on the tarmac, its twin engines warming up for what should have been a routine 3-hour flight to Juneau. The aircraft carried 4 passengers whose names would become legendary in Alaskan aviation history. House Majority Leader Thomas Hale Boggs from Louisiana, Alaska Congressman Nicholas Joseph Begich, Begich's aide Russell Brown, and pilot Don Johns. None of them could have imagined that their departure at 8:56 that morning would mark the beginning of one of the most extensive search operations in American history, or that their disappearance would give birth to decades of speculation about everything from political conspiracy to supernatural phenomena in the region that would later be dubbed the Alaska Triangle. Hale Boggs had arrived in Alaska as part of a 48-hour campaign blitz designed to support his colleague Nick Begich, who was facing a surprisingly competitive re-election battle against Republican challenger Don Young. At 58 years old, Boggs was one of the most powerful politicians in Washington, having served 14 non-consecutive terms in the House of Representatives and wielding considerable influence as the Democratic Majority Leader. His presence in Alaska was particularly significant because he and Begich had been on opposite sides of a leadership contest just a year earlier, making this campaign trip as much about party unity as it was about electoral politics. The two men had spent the previous evening at a fundraising event in Anchorage, where Boggs had delivered his characteristic passionate speeches about democratic values and the importance of Alaska's voice in Congress. Nick Begich, at 39, represented the new generation of Alaskan political leadership, a man who understood both the unique challenges facing America's largest state and the complex relationship between Alaska and the federal government. Born and raised in Minnesota, Begich had moved to Alaska in the early 1960s, establishing himself as an educator and community leader before winning election to Congress in 1970. His campaign for re-election was focused on bringing federal resources to Alaska, while protecting the state's independence and natural resources from what he saw as overreaching federal bureaucracy. The flight to Juneau was intended to be the final stop on a statewide campaign tour that would culminate in a major fundraising event designed to give Begich the financial resources needed for the final push toward Election Day. The weather forecast for the flight had called for marginal visual flight rules conditions along the route, with low clouds and possible icing conditions in the mountain passes between Anchorage and Juneau. Don Johns, the pilot employed by Pan Alaska Airways, was an experienced aviator who had flown this route numerous times and understood the challenges posed by Alaska's rapidly changing weather patterns. The Cessna 310C was a capable twin-engine aircraft, well-suited for Alaska's demanding conditions. Equipped with the necessary instruments for flying in challenging weather and powered by reliable engines that had proven themselves throughout the state's aviation community. However, the aircraft was not equipped with an emergency locator transmitter, despite Alaska state regulations that had recently been enacted requiring such devices on aircraft operating in the territory. At 9:09 that morning, Don Johns made his final radio contact with Anchorage Air Traffic Control, requesting updated weather information as the aircraft approached the mountainous terrain surrounding Portage Pass. This routine communication gave no indication of any problems aboard the aircraft, and weather conditions at the time appeared to be within acceptable limits for the flight to continue. The planned route would take the Cessna through some of Alaska's most spectacular but challenging terrain, including mountain passes where sudden weather changes could create treacherous flying conditions and vast wilderness areas where a downed aircraft might remain hidden for decades. After that final radio transmission, N1812H vanished from all radar screens and never made another verifiable radio contact, disappearing somewhere over the trackless wilderness between Anchorage and Juneau. When the Cessna failed to arrive in Juneau by its scheduled arrival time of noon, airport authorities initiated standard overdue aircraft procedures, attempting to establish radio contact and alerting search and rescue coordinators about the missing flight. By early afternoon, it became clear that something serious had happened to the aircraft carrying two of America's most prominent politicians, and a massive search operation was launched that would eventually involve every branch of the military, the Coast Guard, Civil Air Patrol, and dozens of civilian pilots who volunteered their aircraft and expertise. The initial search focused on the planned flight route, particularly the mountain passes and glaciated terrain where weather-related accidents were most likely to occur. The search operation that followed would become the largest and most extensive in Alaskan history, ultimately involving more than 400 aircraft and thousands of personnel over the course of 39 days. Coast Guard cutters searched the waters of Prince William Sound and the Gulf of Alaska, while Army and Air Force helicopters combed the mountainous terrain along the flight route. Civil Air Patrol volunteers flew hundreds of hours in small aircraft, systematically searching every valley and glacier for any sign of the missing Cessna. The search was complicated by Alaska's vast distances and challenging terrain, as well as weather conditions that frequently grounded aircraft and limited visibility to just a few hundred feet. Despite the enormous resources devoted to finding N1812H, searchers never located so much as a single piece of debris from the aircraft. The failure to find any trace of the aircraft led to intense speculation about what might have caused the disappearance, with theories ranging from mechanical failure and weather-related accidents to far more sinister explanations involving political conspiracy and sabotage. Some observers noted that Hale Boggs had been increasingly critical of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and had called for investigations into government surveillance activities, leading to speculation that the disappearance might have been orchestrated by federal agencies seeking to silence a troublesome politician. These conspiracy theories were fueled by the complete absence of any physical evidence from the crash site, which seemed unusual even by Alaska standards where aircraft accidents typically left at least some recoverable debris. The investigation into the disappearance revealed several troubling details about the flight preparation and equipment aboard N1812H. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the aircraft was not equipped with a functioning emergency locator transmitter, despite Alaska state regulations requiring such devices on aircraft operating in remote areas. Investigators discovered that Don Johns's portable emergency transmitter had been left behind in another aircraft at Fairbanks, and witnesses reported seeing an unidentified object in the pilot's briefcase that resembled but was not identical to a portable emergency locator device. This lack of emergency equipment meant that even if the aircraft had survived an initial impact, searchers would have had no electronic signal to guide them to the crash site. Radio operators throughout Alaska reported hearing fragmentary transmissions that might have come from the missing aircraft during the days following the disappearance. But none of these reports could be conclusively verified or used to narrow the search area. The reported transmissions included garbled voices that some listeners believed sounded like distress calls. But the poor quality and brief duration of these signals made positive identification impossible. These unconfirmed radio contacts only added to the mystery surrounding the flight, raising questions about whether the aircraft had survived an initial emergency, only to crash later in a location even more remote than the planned flight route. The political implications of the disappearance became apparent almost immediately, as both Boggs and Begich were on the ballot for the November election despite being missing and presumed dead. In one of the stranger chapters of American electoral history, both men were re-elected to Congress while search operations for their aircraft continued. Hale Boggs was succeeded in office by his wife Lindy, who would serve 8 terms representing Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District, while Nick Begich was ultimately replaced by his Republican challenger Don Young, who would go on to serve Alaska in Congress for the next 49 years until his own death in 2022. The Begich family would continue to play a prominent role in Alaska politics, with Nick's descendants serving in various elected offices, including the United States Senate and the mayoralty of Anchorage. The disappearance of N1812H would become the foundational case for what paranormal investigators later dubbed the Alaska Triangle, a vast area of wilderness bounded roughly by Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow, where an unusually high number of aircraft and people have vanished without explanation. Proponents of supernatural theories point to the Boggs-Begich disappearance as evidence that mysterious forces operate within this region, noting the complete absence of any recoverable debris and the failure of such an extensive search operation to locate even the smallest trace of the aircraft. Skeptics argue that Alaska's challenging terrain and weather conditions provide sufficient explanation for the disappearance, particularly given the aircraft's lack of proper emergency equipment and the marginal weather conditions along the flight route. Modern technology has renewed interest in solving the 53-year-old mystery, with some investigators suggesting that climate change and glacial melting might eventually reveal the wreckage of N1812H. Several military aircraft that crashed in Alaska during the 1940s and 1950s have been discovered in recent years as glaciers retreat and expose previously hidden crash sites, raising hopes that the Boggs-Begich aircraft might someday be found. Advanced search technologies including satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and sophisticated aircraft tracking systems have been proposed for renewed search efforts, though the vast size of the potential search area continues to present enormous challenges. The legacy of the October 16, 1972 disappearance extends far beyond the immediate political consequences, serving as a sobering reminder of the dangers that continue to face aviators operating in Alaska's unforgiving environment. The case influenced federal aviation regulations requiring emergency locator transmitters on aircraft, potentially saving lives in subsequent aviation emergencies. More broadly, the disappearance of 2 prominent American politicians in Alaska's wilderness underscored the state's remoteness and the risks accepted by anyone who ventures into its vast interior, whether by aircraft, boat, or on foot. Today, the mystery of N1812H remains one of Alaska's most enduring unsolved cases, a testament to the power of the wilderness to reclaim those who dare to challenge its dominion. The autumn wind carried the scent of salt and approaching winter across Nome's West Beach on September 28, 2021, when Florence Okpialuk made her final decision to disappear. The 36-year-old Alaska Native woman had been living in the weathered canvas tent for nearly 3 weeks, part of a growing encampment of homeless individuals who had found themselves displaced in Alaska's harsh economic reality. Florence had moved to Nome from the remote village of Wales, population 145, seeking better opportunities and medical care for her chronic health conditions. What she found instead was a housing crisis that left her camping on the windswept beach while waiting for assistance from overwhelmed social services agencies. Florence's journey to Nome reflected the struggles faced by many Alaska Native people who leave their traditional villages seeking employment, education, or health care in larger communities. Wales, situated on the western tip of the Seward Peninsula just 55 miles from the Siberian coast, offered few opportunities beyond subsistence hunting and fishing. The village had no running water, limited electricity, and healthcare services that required expensive flights to Nome or Anchorage for anything beyond basic first aid. Florence had worked as a village health aide in Wales, providing crucial medical services to her community. But chronic back pain from a childhood injury required specialized treatment that was simply unavailable in her home village. The tent city on Nome's West Beach had grown throughout the summer of 2021 as Alaska's ongoing housing shortage reached crisis levels. Nome, with its population of approximately 3,600 people, struggled to provide adequate housing for both longtime residents and newcomers seeking opportunities in the gold mining industry or government services. The beach encampment existed in a legal gray area, technically on public land but increasingly viewed as a public health and safety concern by local authorities. Florence's tent sat among 8 others, a small community of people who looked out for each other while navigating the complex bureaucracy of social services and housing assistance programs. Those who knew Florence described her as a quiet, thoughtful woman who had maintained her dignity despite difficult circumstances. She spoke fluent Inupiaq and English, serving as an informal translator and advocate for other Alaska Native people in the camp, who struggled with language barriers when dealing with government agencies. Her tent was organized and clean, containing a few personal belongings including family photographs, traditional beadwork supplies, and the medications she needed for her chronic conditions. She had been working with Nome's social services coordinator to secure permanent housing, but the waiting list for affordable apartments stretched for months or even years. On the Churdo evening of September 27th, several residents of the beach camp remembered Florence seeming more anxious than usual, pacing near her tent and making frequent trips to the payphone at the nearby gas station. She had mentioned waiting for an important phone call about a potential housing opportunity, expressing both hope and skepticism that anything would come of it. The other campers noticed she had packed her few belongings into a backpack, though she had not mentioned any plans to leave the area. That night, she shared coffee with her tent neighbors around a small campfire, speaking in Inupiaq about her grandmother's traditional stories and expressing worry about the approaching winter. The morning of September 28th dawned gray and windy with temperatures in the low 40s and the promise of Alaska's brief autumn rapidly giving way to winter's grip. Florence's tent neighbors remember her being up early, sitting outside her shelter and watching the sunrise over Norton Sound, while drinking instant coffee from a metal camping cup. Around 8 in the morning, she told Martha Kokaluk, the woman whose tent was closest to hers, that she was going for a walk along the beach to clear her head and think about her options. She was wearing her usual outfit, dark jeans, a heavy flannel shirt, a gray hooded sweatshirt, and black sneakers that had seen better days. Martha would later tell investigators that Florence seemed different that morning, more focused and determined than she had appeared in recent days. The two women had developed a friendship based on their shared experience of displacement from traditional villages, and Martha recognized signs of stress and decision-making in her friend's demeanor. Florence had mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the housing assistance application process and frustrated by the seemingly endless requirements and documentation needed to qualify for help. She expressed particular anxiety about the approaching winter, knowing that the beach camp would become uninhabitable once Nome's brutal weather arrived in earnest. When Florence failed to return to her tent by afternoon, Martha initially assumed she had found indoor shelter for the day or was dealing with paperwork at one of the social services offices. However, as evening approached and temperatures began dropping, the other camp residents grew concerned and began searching the immediate area. They found Florence's tent exactly as she had left it, with her sleeping bag, medications, and identification documents still inside. Most disturbingly, her heavy winter coat remained in the tent, despite the cooling weather that would have made the garment necessary for anyone planning to spend extended time outdoors. The search expanded the next morning when Martha contacted Nome Police Department to report her friend missing. Officer David Kokiok, himself an Alaska native who understood the cultural nuances of the situation, interviewed the other camp residents and began organizing a systematic search of Nome's limited road system and the extensive beach areas surrounding the community. The initial search focused on locations where Florence might have sought shelter, including abandoned buildings, storage facilities, and areas around the harbor where she might have tried to escape the increasingly harsh weather. Alaska State Troopers joined the search operation on the second day, bringing additional personnel and specialized equipment designed for wilderness searches in Alaska's challenging environment. Trooper Jeff Jacobson, who had extensive experience with missing persons cases involving Alaska Native individuals, coordinated with local tribal organizations and traditional knowledge holders who understood the area's geography and hazards. The search teams utilized all-terrain vehicles to cover the road system connecting Nome to surrounding communities, while volunteers on foot searched the extensive beach areas and tidal zones where someone might have encountered difficulties. The discovery that would haunt investigators came on October 3rd, nearly a week after Florence's disappearance. A group of volunteers searching the beach approximately 2 miles west of the tent camp found Florence's black sneakers, socks, and gray hooded sweatshirt neatly arranged on the sand just above the high tide line. The clothing appeared to have been deliberately placed rather than scattered by wind or waves, and there were no signs of struggle or violence in the surrounding area. Most puzzling was the fact that the items showed no evidence of prolonged exposure to the elements, despite having been missing for nearly a week during a period of harsh weather. The condition and arrangement of Florence's clothing created more questions than answers for investigators trying to understand what had happened during her walk along the beach. The sneakers were placed side by side as if someone had carefully removed them before entering the water, while the socks were tucked inside and the sweatshirt was folded nearby. However, extensive searches of the water and shoreline areas revealed no trace of Florence herself, despite conditions that should have preserved evidence of what had occurred. The discovery site was thoroughly documented and processed for forensic evidence, but investigators found no clear indication of whether Florence had entered the water voluntarily or encountered some other form of harm. The investigation into Florence's disappearance revealed the broader context of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people that has affected Alaska Native communities for generations. Alaska has one of the highest rates of missing Indigenous persons in the United States, with cases often receiving insufficient resources and attention from law enforcement agencies. Florence's case became part of a growing movement demanding better investigation and prevention efforts led by Alaska Native activists who argued that systemic discrimination and cultural misunderstanding contributed to the high number of unresolved cases affecting their communities. The search for Florence continued for weeks, involving helicopter overflights, marine patrols, and ground teams that covered hundreds of square miles of wilderness surrounding Nome. The Alaska Bureau of Investigation brought in specialized equipment, including sonar devices, to search the waters of Norton Sound and ground-penetrating radar to examine areas where Florence might have sought shelter or encountered harm. Despite these extensive efforts, investigators found no additional evidence that could explain what had happened to the missing woman or provide closure for her family and friends. Florence's family from Wales traveled to Nome to participate in the search efforts and advocate for continued investigation into her disappearance. Her sister Agnes Okpieluk spoke publicly about the need for better support services for Alaska Native people dealing with homelessness and the importance of treating missing persons cases with appropriate urgency regardless of the victim's housing status. The family organized traditional ceremonies to honor Florence and call for her safe return, drawing attention to the cultural dimensions of the case that outside investigators might not fully understand. The case attracted national attention when podcast investigator Payne Lindsay included Florence's disappearance in his examination of missing persons cases in Nome, Alaska. His investigation revealed the complex social and economic factors that had contributed to Florence's vulnerable situation, as well as the challenges faced by law enforcement agencies investigating cases involving Alaska Native individuals. The podcast brought renewed scrutiny to Nome's history of unexplained disappearances and the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people throughout Alaska. Today, Florence Okpielik's disappearance remains officially classified as an open missing persons case, with Alaska state troopers continuing to follow up on any new information that might explain what happened during her walk along Nome's West Beach. Her tent was eventually removed from the beach encampment, but her personal belongings were carefully preserved by investigators who hoped that someday new evidence might provide answers for her family. Florence's case serves as a sobering reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by Alaska Native people dealing with homelessness and displacement, and the urgent need for better support systems to prevent similar tragedies in America's most remote communities. The weathered fishermen gathered around the scarred wooden table at Port Protection's only saloon tell the story of Lucas Avery with the kind of hushed reverence reserved for the dead and the disappeared. It was a tale that had grown in the telling over the past 3 years, acquiring new details and darker implications with each retelling. But the core facts remained as solid and unforgiving as the granite cliffs that surrounded their remote southeast Alaska community. Lucas Avery, a 32-year-old maritime engineer from Portland, Oregon, had come to Port Protection in August of 2021 seeking the kind of authentic Alaskan experience that cruise ships and tour packages could never provide. Port Protection sits on the northern tip of Prince of Wales Island, a community so remote that it lacks basic infrastructure most Americans take for granted. No roads connect it to the outside world, no electrical grid powers its scattered homes, and no cell phone towers carry signals across the dense temperate rainforest that blankets the surrounding mountains. The 57 residents who call Port Protection home have chosen isolation deliberately, crafting lives built around subsistence fishing, hunting, and the kind of radical self-reliance that Alaska demands from those who venture beyond the reach of modern conveniences. Lucas had read about the community in outdoor magazines and planned his visit as the culminating adventure of a month-long solo journey through Southeast Alaska's Inside Passage. Lucas arrived aboard his 19-foot sea kayak on August 14th, having paddled north from Ketchikan through some of the most challenging waters in Southeast Alaska. The journey had taken him 2 weeks, navigating tidal currents that could reach 8 knots and threading his way between islands where brown bears outnumbered humans by significant margins. Local residents remember him as enthusiastic and well-prepared, carrying high-quality camping equipment and demonstrating the kind of competence on the water that came from years of experience kayaking the Pacific Northwest's demanding coastlines. He had established his camp on a small beach about a mile south of the main settlement, close enough to visit the community but far enough away to maintain the solitude he sought. The residents of Port Protection operate according to an informal but effective communication network based on marine radio frequencies that connect fishing boats, float planes, and the handful of homes equipped with radio equipment. Lucas had purchased a handheld marine radio specifically for his Alaska adventure, programming it with the frequencies used by local fishermen and the Coast Guard station in Ketchikan. During his first week in the area, he checked in regularly with the local radio net, providing updates on his location and plans while gathering information about weather conditions and potential hazards in the surrounding waters. His daily routine followed the rhythms established by experienced sea kayakers operating in Alaska's challenging maritime environment. Lucas would rise before dawn to take advantage of the calm conditions that often prevailed during early morning hours. when tidal currents were manageable and winds had not yet begun building. He spent his days exploring the intricate coastline of Prince of Wales Island, photographing wildlife and documenting his experiences in a waterproof journal that he planned to use for a book about solo wilderness travel. Evenings were devoted to camp maintenance, meal preparation, and radio communication with both local residents and his family back in Oregon. The weather forecast for August 22nd called for typical Southeast Alaska conditions. Overcast skies with periods of light rain and winds from the southeast at 10 to 15 knots. These were well within the parameters that Lucas had established for safe kayaking, and he announced his intention to explore the waters around nearby El Capitan Island during the morning radio net. Several local fishermen acknowledged his transmission and advised him to monitor Channel 16 for any changes in weather conditions, as Southeast Alaska's maritime climate could deteriorate rapidly without warning. The last confirmed communication from Lucas came at 11:47 that morning, when he radioed that he was approaching the northern shore of El Capitan Island and planned to explore several small coves before returning to his camp. When Lucas failed to participate in the evening radio net, Port Protection residents initially assumed he had experienced equipment failure or was simply out of range of the repeater station. However, by the following morning, concern began growing among the tight-knit community, especially when his planned return to camp went unnoticed. Gary Muhlberger, a longtime resident and experienced mariner, organized an informal search party using local fishing boats to check the areas where Lucas had planned to paddle. The searchers found Lucas's empty kayak floating upside down approximately 3 miles northeast of El Capitan Island, its emergency paddle missing and no sign of its occupant. The discovery of the overturned kayak triggered an immediate response from the United States Coast Guard station in Ketchikan, which dispatched a helicopter crew and additional vessels to search the waters around Prince of Wales Island. Coast Guard rescue swimmer Jake Morrison later described the conditions they encountered as challenging but not extreme, with 3 to 4 foot seas and visibility of approximately 2 miles. The search pattern expanded throughout the day to cover more than 50 square miles of water, utilizing both surface vessels and aircraft equipped with thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting a person in the water even in poor visibility conditions. The search operation revealed several disturbing details about Lucas's disappearance that puzzled both Coast Guard personnel and local residents familiar with sea kayaking safety procedures. The kayak's emergency paddle, which should have been secured to the deck with shock cord, was missing entirely, suggesting either equipment failure or that Lucas had been using it when whatever incident occurred took place. More puzzling was the absence of his personal flotation device, which experienced kayakers in Alaska waters typically wear at all times due to the lethally cold water temperatures that can cause incapacitation within minutes of immersion. Local residents familiar with the waters around El Capitan Island noted that the area where Lucas's kayak was found lay directly in the path of strong tidal currents that funnel between the island and the mainland shore. These currents, known locally as the El Capitan Rapids, can reach velocities of up to 6 knots during spring tides, creating standing waves and turbulent conditions that challenge even experienced kayakers. However, the tide tables for August 22nd showed relatively moderate current flow, and Lucas had demonstrated sufficient skill during his previous weeks in the area to handle such conditions under normal circumstances. The search continued for 5 days, involving Coast Guard aircraft from as far away as Sitka and volunteer vessels from communities throughout southeast Alaska. Searchers combed hundreds of miles of coastline, knowing that southeast Alaska's complex geography could carry debris or a person dozens of miles from the initial incident location. The search dogs brought in from Juneau lost any scent trail at the water's edge near Lucas's camp, confirming that he had departed by kayak as planned, but providing no additional information about what might have happened during his final paddle. Weather conditions during the search operation included periods of dense fog that limited visibility and occasionally grounded aircraft, highlighting the challenging environment that kayakers face in Southeast Alaska waters. Local fishermen participating in the search efforts noted several anomalies during the days following Lucas's disappearance, including unusual behavior by marine mammals and birds that some attributed to the presence of orcas or other large predators in the area. While predator encounters involving sea kayakers are extremely rare, the remote waters around Prince of Wales Island support populations of both orcas and stellar sea lions that could potentially pose hazards to small watercraft. The official search was suspended after a week when Coast Guard commanders determined that survival in the 50-degree water temperatures was no longer possible, even for someone wearing appropriate cold water protection. However, port protection residents continued informal searches for several more weeks, checking remote beaches and coves where debris from Lucas's kayaking gear might have washed ashore. These efforts recovered several items of equipment that were positively identified as belonging to Lucas, including a waterproof storage bag containing his journal and camera, but provided no additional clues about the circumstances of his disappearance. The investigation into Lucas's disappearance examined several potential explanations, ranging from equipment failure and medical emergency to encounters with marine wildlife or extreme weather conditions. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted a preliminary investigation into the incident, interviewing local residents and examining the recovered kayak for evidence of structural failure or impact damage. However, the investigation was hampered by the absence of witnesses and the limited physical evidence available from the scene of the disappearance. Lucas's family traveled to port protection following the unsuccessful search, seeking closure and answers that the investigation had been unable to provide. His parents established a memorial fund supporting maritime safety education and search and rescue operations in Southeast Alaska, while his sister Sarah continued advocating for improved emergency communication systems in remote areas where cell phone coverage was non-existent. The family also worked with the Coast Guard to improve notification procedures for solo kayakers operating in Alaska's remote waters. The story of Lucas Avery's disappearance became part of the folklore surrounding port protection, joining other tales of mariners who had challenged Southeast Alaska's unforgiving waters and lost. Local residents speak of his case as a reminder that even experienced outdoors people can encounter hazards that prove insurmountable, and that Alaska's wilderness demands constant vigilance and respect from those who venture into its embrace. The empty beach where Lucas had established his final camp serves as an unofficial memorial to his memory, and a sobering reminder of the risks that accompany any attempt to experience Alaska's authentic wilderness. Today, Lucas Avery's disappearance remains classified as an unsolved missing persons case, though Coast Guard officials consider it most likely that he drowned following a kayaking accident in the challenging waters around El Capitan Island. His story continues to influence safety discussions among sea kayakers planning expeditions in Southeast Alaska, serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of emergency preparedness and communication systems when venturing into some of the most remote waters in North America. The mystery of what exactly happened during his final paddle may never be solved, but Lucas's legacy lives on in the improved safety practices adopted by other adventurers seeking to experience Alaska's maritime wilderness. The northern lights danced across the star-studded sky like ethereal ribbons of green and gold, casting an otherworldly glow over the remote backcountry lodge nestled deep in the Susitna Valley. Molly Winthrop pressed her face against the frosted window of her guest cabin, mesmerized by the aurora borealis display that had drawn her away from the warmth of Vermont's familiar forests to this wilderness sanctuary 60 miles northwest of Anchorage. At 43, the freelance nature photographer had built her career documenting wildlife and landscapes across North America. But Alaska's raw beauty represented the pinnacle of her artistic ambitions. The Aurora Lodge, a collection of rustic cabins accessible only by float plane or snow machine, promised the kind of pristine wilderness experience that modern tourism rarely provided. Molly had arrived at the lodge 3 days earlier aboard a vintage de Havilland Beaver float plane piloted by Jake Morrison, a taciturn Alaskan who had been flying passengers and supplies to remote locations for over 2 decades. The 40-minute flight from Anchorage had taken them over endless expanses of boreal forest punctuated by frozen lakes and mountain peaks that pierced the horizon like ancient sentinels. The Aurora Lodge sat on the shore of Mirror Lake, a pristine body of water surrounded by towering spruce trees, and accessible only during the brief summer months when aircraft could land on water or during winter when the frozen surface could support small planes equipped with skis. The lodge itself consisted of a main building housing the dining room, common area, and owner's quarters, surrounded by 8 individual guest cabins that could accommodate up to 20 visitors during peak season. During Molly's February visit, she was one of only 6 guests, sharing the remote sanctuary with 2 other photographers from California, a wildlife biologist from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and a retired couple from Minnesota who had been visiting the lodge annually for 15 years. The intimate group size created a family-like atmosphere where guests shared meals, stories, and the profound silence that characterized Alaska's winter wilderness. Lodge owner Robert Hendricks had purchased the property in 1998 after retiring from a career as a commercial airline pilot, drawn by the same pristine wilderness that attracted his guests. He had spent years upgrading the facilities while maintaining their rustic character, installing a diesel generator for electricity, a sophisticated water filtration system, and communication equipment that could reach emergency services in Anchorage despite the remote location. Hendricks prided himself on providing guests with authentic wilderness experiences while maintaining the safety standards that came from his aviation background and decades of living in Alaska's challenging environment. The evening of February 15th began like most others at the Aurora Lodge, with guests gathering in the main building after dinner to share stories and watch for aurora activity through the large windows that faced north toward the Brooks Range. Molly had spent the day photographing wildlife tracks in the fresh snow, documenting the intricate patterns left by snowshoe hares, ptarmigan, and the occasional wolf pack that traversed the frozen landscape. She had captured stunning images of ice formations along the lake shore and was planning to venture out later that night if the aurora forecast proved accurate. Weather conditions that evening were ideal for aurora viewing, with clear skies, minimal wind, and temperatures hovering around -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The National Weather Service had issued an aurora forecast predicting moderate to strong activity, and the lodge's location far from any light pollution offered unobstructed views of the northern horizon where the displays typically appeared most prominently. Molly had prepared her camera equipment earlier in the day, checking battery levels and ensuring her tripod was properly adjusted for the long exposures required to capture the aurora's ethereal movements. Around 10:30 that evening, the first faint green glow appeared on the northern horizon, gradually intensifying into the spectacular display that had drawn photographers from around the world to Alaska's winter wilderness. Molly bundled herself in multiple layers of insulation, gathered her camera gear, and stepped out into the crystalline night air that immediately began freezing the moisture in her breath. She established her photography position about 200 yards from her cabin near the lakeshore where the aurora's reflection would create mirror images in the polished ice surface. The other guests had also ventured outside to witness the celestial display, with some choosing to watch from the heated comfort of the main lodge while others braved the extreme cold to experience the aurora more intimately. Lodge owner Hendricks made his regular rounds to check on guests, reminding everyone about the dangers of extended cold exposure and advising them to return to heated buildings if they began experiencing any signs of hypothermia. The temperature had dropped to -25 degrees, cold enough to cause frostbite and exposed skin within minutes, and potentially fatal for anyone inadequately protected against the elements. Molly's photography session continued for nearly 2 hours as the aurora display reached peak intensity, with dancing curtains of light stretching from horizon to horizon in a cosmic performance that left her breathless with wonder. Her specialized cold weather camera equipment functioned perfectly in the extreme conditions, capturing image after image of the otherworldly phenomenon that had inspired countless legends among Alaska's indigenous peoples. She periodically returned to her cabin to warm her hands and check her equipment, but the spectacular display kept drawing her back outside despite the brutal cold. The last confirmed sighting of Molly occurred around 12:45 in the morning, when fellow photographer Dave Chen saw her adjusting her tripod near the lakeshore while the aurora activity began gradually diminishing. Chen had been photographing from a location closer to the main lodge and noticed Molly's silhouette against the starlit snow as she continued working despite the increasingly bitter cold. He considered approaching her to suggest returning to the warmth of the buildings, but decided against interrupting what appeared to be a productive photography session for someone experienced enough to manage her own safety in challenging conditions. When Molly failed to appear for breakfast the following morning, Hendricks knocked on her cabin door and discovered it unlocked with no sign that she had returned after her aurora photography session. Her camera equipment was missing, suggesting she had been carrying it when whatever incident occurred took place. The cabin showed no signs of disturbance, with her remaining gear neatly organized and her bed unslept in, indicating she had never returned from her late-night photography expedition. Most troubling was the absence of her heavy winter parka, which remained hanging in the cabin closet despite the lethal cold that would have made such protection essential for survival. The search for Molly began immediately, with Hendricks and his staff conducting an initial survey of the immediate area around the lodge while other guests checked the shoreline and nearby trails. Alaska State Troopers were notified by radio, but severe weather conditions prevented immediate helicopter support, leaving the initial search efforts to lodge personnel and guests who understood the urgency of finding someone exposed to Alaska's winter wilderness. The search was complicated by fresh snowfall that had begun around 3 in the morning, potentially covering any tracks or signs that might have indicated Molly's movements or the location where an incident had occurred. Professional search and rescue teams arrived the following day aboard snow machines and all-terrain vehicles, bringing specialized equipment and trained search dogs capable of detecting human scent even under challenging winter conditions. The teams systematically covered expanding search grids around the lodge, paying particular attention to the lakeshore area where Molly had been photographing and any terrain features that might have posed hazards during nighttime travel. Despite these extensive efforts, searchers found no trace of Molly or her camera equipment, an outcome that seemed impossible given the limited area where she could have traveled on foot in the extreme cold. The search expanded to include helicopter overflights once weather conditions improved, with aircraft equipped with thermal imaging technology that could detect heat signatures even in heavily forested terrain. Pilots familiar with Alaska's search and rescue operations noted that the pristine snow conditions should have preserved any evidence of Molly's movements, making the absence of tracks or disturbance signs particularly puzzling. The helicopter searches covered more than 50 square miles of wilderness surrounding the lodge, including remote valleys and ridgelines where someone might have wandered if disoriented by cold or equipment failure. As days passed without discovering any trace of Molly, theories about her disappearance ranged from cold weather accidents and wildlife encounters to more speculative explanations involving the mysterious phenomena that some associated with Alaska's remote wilderness areas. Lodge guests and staff reported unusual sounds during the nights following her disappearance, including distant howling that could have been wolves or wind, and unexplained lights that might have been aircraft or aurora activity. These accounts contributed to an atmosphere of unease that affected everyone at the remote lodge. The investigation revealed that Molly had been an experienced cold-weather photographer who understood the dangers of Alaska's winter environment and typically took appropriate precautions when working in extreme conditions. Her camera equipment included backup batteries and cold-weather protection systems that should have functioned reliably in the conditions she encountered that night. However, investigators noted that even experienced outdoors people could encounter unexpected equipment failures or medical emergencies that might lead to life-threatening situations in Alaska's unforgiving environment. The search for Molly continued for 2 weeks before being officially suspended, though lodge owner Hendricks and other local residents maintained informal searches throughout the remainder of the winter. Spring searches after the snow melted revealed no additional evidence that might explain her disappearance, leaving her family and friends without the closure they desperately sought. The Aurora Lodge continued operating, but Hendricks installed additional safety equipment and implemented more stringent guest monitoring procedures to prevent similar incidents. Today, Molly Winthrop's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery that has become part of the folklore surrounding Alaska's remote wilderness lodges. Her case serves as a sobering reminder that even experienced outdoors people can encounter hazards that prove insurmountable in Alaska's challenging environment, where help may be hours or days away and where weather conditions can change from manageable to life-threatening within minutes. The dancing aurora that drew her to that frozen lake shore continues to attract photographers and adventure seekers. But Molly's story ensures that visitors understand the respect that Alaska's wilderness demands from all who venture into its embrace. The mist hung heavy over Resurrection Bay as the massive Norwegian Star glided toward the port of Seward, its 15 decks carrying 3,400 passengers eager to experience the raw majesty of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. Among them stood Anthony Rios, a 51-year-old civil engineer from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who had spent months planning this Alaskan cruise as a celebration of his recent divorce settlement and a chance to reconnect with the wilderness photography that had been his passion before marriage and career demands consumed his time. He leaned against the ship's railing on Deck 7, watching the towering peaks of the Chugach Mountains emerge from the morning fog like ancient guardians protecting the secrets of America's last frontier. Anthony had booked the cruise independently, seeking solitude and adventure after 23 years of marriage that had ended amicably but left him questioning the direction of his life. His ex-wife, Patricia, had received their house in Santa Fe's foothills, while Anthony kept their shared photography equipment and the freedom to pursue the travel adventures they had always postponed for more practical concerns. The Norwegian Star's 7-day inside passage itinerary promised glacier viewing, wildlife encounters, and most importantly for Anthony, access to some of Alaska's most spectacular hiking opportunities during the ship's port calls in Ketchikan, Juneau, and Seward. The ship docked in Seward at 6:30 that morning, with passengers scheduled to disembark for various shore excursions ranging from luxury coach tours to challenging backcountry adventures. Anthony had researched the area extensively, ultimately choosing a guided glacier trek to the terminus of Exit Glacier, located within Kenai Fjords National Park about 10 miles from downtown Seward. The 8-hour excursion would take participants through temperate rainforest, across rocky moraines, and finally onto the glacier itself, offering unparalleled opportunities for the landscape photography that had drawn Anthony to Alaska in the first place. The tour group consisted of 12 passengers led by Marcus Peterson, a certified wilderness guide with 15 years of experience leading visitors through Alaska's challenging terrain. Peterson briefed the group on safety protocols, weather conditions, and the physical demands of glacier travel, emphasizing that participants needed to maintain visual contact with guides at all times, due to the potential for rapidly changing conditions and hidden crevasses. Anthony impressed the guide with his quality camera equipment and his questions about optimal shooting positions, demonstrating both preparation and respect for the environment they would be entering. The initial portion of the trek proceeded smoothly, with the group hiking established trails through dense Sitka spruce forest, while Peterson provided commentary about the area's natural history and the dramatic retreat of Exit Glacier over the past century. Anthony hung back from the main group periodically to capture images of old-growth trees draped in moss and the occasional glimpse of snow-capped peaks through the forest canopy. His fellow hikers were a mix of fitness levels and ages, but all seemed capable of handling the moderate terrain that characterized the approach to the glacier. The group reached the glacier's terminus around noon, where they paused for lunch while marveling at the massive ice formation that had carved the valley over thousands of years. Anthony was particularly fascinated by the glacier's constantly changing surface, where ice flows created dramatic crevasses and ice caves that captured light in spectacular ways. He asked Peterson about accessing better photography positions, expressing particular interest in the lateral moraines that bordered the glacier, and offered elevated vantage points for capturing the ice field's full scope. Peterson agreed to lead a smaller subgroup, including Anthony and 3 other experienced hikers, to a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile from the main glacier viewing area. The guide emphasized that this advanced position required careful attention to footing and weather conditions, as afternoon temperature changes could create unstable ice conditions and sudden fog banks that reduced visibility to mere yards. Anthony assured the guide that he understood the risks and would follow all safety protocols while pursuing his photography objectives. The advanced photography group spent approximately 90 minutes on the rocky outcrop, with Anthony capturing what he later described to fellow hikers as some of the most spectacular glacier images he had ever taken. The lighting conditions were perfect, with partial cloud cover creating dramatic contrasts between the blue-white ice and the surrounding granite peaks. Anthony's enthusiasm was evident to other group members who noticed him moving confidently among the rocks while seeking optimal shooting angles for his increasingly heavy camera bag. The group began their return journey around 3:15, with Peterson leading them back toward the main trail system that would take them to the tour bus pickup location in Seward. The weather had remained stable throughout the day, with temperatures in the mid-40s and only light winds that posed no challenges for experienced hikers. Anthony continued photographing during the return journey, occasionally asking the group to pause while he captured images of wildlife or particularly striking landscape features along the trail. The first indication that something was wrong came when the group reached the trail junction, where they should have regrouped with other tour participants. A quick head count revealed that Anthony was no longer with the group, though none of the other hikers could recall exactly when they had last seen him. Peterson immediately implemented emergency protocols, dividing the remaining hikers into search teams while using his satellite communication device to contact park rangers and the Norwegian Star's shore excursion coordinators. The initial search focused on the route between the rocky outcrop and the trail junction, covering approximately half a mile of varied terrain that included both established trails and off-trail areas where Anthony might have wandered while seeking photography opportunities. Search teams called his name repeatedly while looking for any signs of his passage, including dropped equipment or disturbed vegetation that might indicate where he had left the main group. The search was complicated by the terrain's complex topography, which included numerous side valleys and rock formations where someone could easily become separated from their companions. Park rangers arrived within 2 hours, bringing additional personnel and specialized search equipment, including avalanche beacons that could detect electronic devices at considerable distances. The Rangers established a command post at the Exit Glacier Visitor Center while coordinating with the Coast Guard, Alaska State Troopers, and volunteer search and rescue teams from the Seward area. The Norwegian Star delayed its departure while ship personnel contacted Anthony's emergency contacts and coordinated with search coordinators about extending the search window. The search operation expanded dramatically on the second day, with helicopter crews from the Alaska National Guard joining ground teams that had worked through the night despite challenging weather conditions. The helicopters carried thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting human heat signatures through forest canopies and cloud cover, technology that had proven successful in previous Alaskan search operations. However, the complex terrain around Exit Glacier presented unique challenges for both ground and aerial searchers, with numerous valleys and rock formations that could hide someone from detection. Search teams discovered Anthony's camera on the third day, found approximately 1 mile from where he had last been seen by fellow tour participants. The camera was located in a steep-sided ravine that had been carved by glacial meltwater, sitting on rocks about 30 feet below the rim where Anthony might have been photographing the scenic gorge. The camera appeared undamaged and contained hundreds of images from Anthony's Alaska cruise, including spectacular shots taken during his final glacier trek that documented his movements up until the time of his disappearance. The discovery location raised troubling questions about what had happened to Anthony after he became separated from his tour group. The ravine where his camera was found offered dramatic photography opportunities with a small waterfall and interesting rock formations that would have appealed to someone seeking unique landscape images. However, the steep terrain would have required extreme caution to access safely, and the loose rock surfaces could have created hazardous conditions for anyone attempting to climb down for better shooting positions. Analysis of the images stored on Anthony's camera revealed a progression of photographs taken throughout the day, with the final images captured at the rocky outcrop where the tour group had spent time before beginning their return journey. Camera timestamp data suggested that Anthony had continued photographing after the group began moving, potentially explaining how he had become separated from his companions. The final images showed no signs of distress or emergency conditions, suggesting that whatever incident occurred had happened after Anthony stopped taking photographs. The search continued for 8 days, involving more than 50 personnel and covering over 20 square miles of challenging wilderness terrain. Searchers utilized trained search dogs, helicopter overflights, ground-penetrating radar, and even divers who explored deep pools in the glacial streams where Anthony might have fallen. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Anthony himself was ever found, leaving investigators with more questions than answers about what had happened to the experienced hiker and photographer. The Norwegian Star eventually continued its itinerary after coordinating with Anthony's family and ensuring that all possible search resources remained committed to finding him. Cruise line representatives worked with law enforcement agencies to interview other passengers who might have interacted with Anthony during the voyage, seeking any information that might explain his disappearance or provide leads for the ongoing investigation. The ship's security footage confirmed Anthony's participation in the shore excursion but provided no additional insights into his state of mind or intentions. Today, Anthony Rios remains officially listed as a missing person, with Alaska State Troopers maintaining an open case file that includes all evidence collected during the extensive search operation. His disappearance has influenced safety protocols for glacier tours in the Seward area, with guides now implementing more stringent procedures for maintaining group cohesion and accounting for all participants throughout challenging terrain. The mystery of what happened to Anthony in those final moments serves as a sobering reminder that Alaska's wilderness can claim even experienced visitors who understand and respect its dangers, leaving families and investigators searching for answers that may never come. The camera's memory card would later reveal that Samantha Harding had captured her final photographs at 11:47 in the evening on September 3, 2022. As the aurora borealis painted the Arctic sky in shades of emerald and violet above the frozen tundra surrounding Utqiagvik, Alaska. The 29-year-old travel blogger from Baltimore had spent 6 days documenting life in America's northernmost community, formerly known as Barrow, sharing her experiences with an online following of nearly 40,000 subscribers who eagerly awaited her posts from some of the world's most remote destinations. Her last Instagram story, posted just hours before she vanished, showed her bundled in Arctic gear beside a frozen river, promising her followers the most spectacular Northern Lights footage they had ever seen. Samantha had built her reputation as an adventure travel blogger by seeking out destinations that other content creators avoided, places where luxury accommodations and reliable internet connections gave way to authentic cultural experiences and natural phenomena that could only be witnessed in the world's most isolated corners. Her blog, titled Wandering Beyond Borders, documented journeys to Mongolia's Gobi Desert, Iceland's volcanic highlands, and the remote villages of northern Norway. Alaska represented the culmination of her Arctic exploration series, a months-long project that had taken her from the temperate rainforests of southeast Alaska to the windswept tundra of the North Slope. The journey to Utqiagvik required careful planning and significant financial investment, as the community sits more than 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle and can only be reached by commercial flights from Anchorage or Fairbanks. Samantha had spent weeks coordinating with local guides and cultural liaisons, ensuring that her documentation of Inupiaq traditional life would be respectful and accurate. She had obtained the necessary permits for drone photography and invested in specialized Arctic camera equipment designed to function in temperatures that could drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit even during the brief summer months. Her accommodation at the Top of the World Hotel placed her in the heart of Utqiagvik, a community of approximately 4,000 people who had adapted to life in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The hotel served as a gathering place for visitors ranging from climate researchers and oil industry workers to the occasional adventure tourist willing to pay premium prices for authentic Arctic experiences. Samantha quickly established relationships with local residents, including traditional whaling captain Moses Kanguk and his family, who agreed to share their knowledge of subsistence hunting and the cultural traditions that sustained Inupiaq communities through countless generations of Arctic survival. Her daily routine involved early morning photography sessions to capture the unique quality of Arctic light, followed by interviews with community members about their adaptation to climate change and the preservation of traditional knowledge. Samantha's blog posts from Utqiagvik revealed genuine respect for the challenges facing Arctic communities, avoiding the sensationalism that characterized many outsider accounts of life in extreme environments. She documented the construction techniques that allowed buildings to survive on permanently frozen ground, the complex logistics required to supply a community accessible only by air or sea, and the sophisticated traditional knowledge that enabled successful subsistence hunting in conditions that would quickly prove fatal to unprepared visitors. September 3rd marked the beginning of Samantha's final planned expedition, a solo photography journey to document the landscape surrounding Utqiagvik during the brief transition period between the endless daylight of Arctic summer and the approaching polar night. She had rented an all-terrain vehicle from a local outfitter, equipped with GPS navigation, emergency communication equipment, and survival supplies appropriate for extended travel on the tundra. Her planned route would take her approximately 15 miles southeast of town to the banks of the Mead River, where she hoped to capture images of caribou migration and the dramatic interplay between tundra vegetation and the approaching winter freeze. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 20s, ideal conditions for the aurora photography that had drawn Samantha to Utqiagvik during the autumn equinox period when geomagnetic activity typically peaks. She departed the hotel around 4 in the afternoon, allowing sufficient time to reach her planned camping location and establish her photography equipment before darkness provided optimal conditions for capturing the northern lights. Her GPS device was programmed with waypoints marking her intended route and emergency shelter locations, while her satellite communicator provided two-way messaging capability with search and rescue coordinators in Anchorage. Local residents who saw Samantha departing remembered her enthusiasm about the planned photography session, as well as her careful preparation and respect for the Arctic environment that had claimed the lives of numerous visitors over the years. She carried redundant navigation systems, emergency shelter, and sufficient food and fuel for 3 days, following the survival protocols that experienced Arctic travelers consider essential for any journey beyond the immediate vicinity of permanent settlements. Her all-terrain vehicle was equipped with tracks rather than wheels, providing the flotation necessary for travel across tundra that could be deceptively soft, despite appearing solid and stable. The last confirmed GPS ping from Samantha's devices occurred at 10:32 that evening, placing her approximately 12 miles southeast of Utqiagvik, near the planned photography location beside the Mead River. The signal indicated normal device function and suggested that Samantha had successfully reached her intended destination and was presumably beginning her aurora photography session. Weather conditions at the time remained within acceptable parameters, with clear skies, light winds, and aurora activity that would have provided the spectacular displays she had traveled thousands of miles to document. When Samantha failed to return to Utqiagvik by her planned departure time the following afternoon, hotel staff contacted local authorities who initiated emergency protocols for overdue travelers in the Arctic environment. The North Slope Borough Search and Rescue Coordinator assembled a team of volunteers familiar with the terrain between Utqiagvik and the Mead River, while Alaska state troopers prepared to deploy additional resources if the initial search efforts proved unsuccessful. The urgency of the situation was heightened by weather forecasts predicting deteriorating conditions that could make search operations extremely dangerous for both the missing person and rescue personnel. The search team located Samantha's abandoned all-terrain vehicle around noon on September 5th, approximately 2 miles from the last GPS coordinates and showing no obvious signs of mechanical failure or accident. The vehicle was properly parked and secured with Samantha's emergency supplies still inside, along with most of her camera equipment. However, her primary camera, tripod, and cold weather clothing were missing, suggesting that she had departed the vehicle voluntarily for what was intended to be a temporary photography expedition. Most puzzling was the absence of any tracks leading away from the vehicle, as the soft tundra should have preserved clear evidence of her direction of travel. The discovery of Samantha's camera equipment came 2 days later, found by searchers approximately 1 mile northwest of her vehicle near a small lake that offered dramatic foreground elements for aurora photography. The camera and tripod were positioned as if Samantha had been actively photographing when something caused her to abandon the equipment. The camera's memory card contained hundreds of images documenting her journey to Utqiagvik, including spectacular aurora photographs taken throughout the night of September 3rd that demonstrated both her technical skill and artistic vision as a photographer. Analysis of the final images revealed increasingly spectacular aurora displays that would have required Samantha to remain outside for extended periods while adjusting camera settings and composition. The timestamps indicated continuous photography activity until 11:47, when the image sequence abruptly stopped with no obvious technical malfunction or environmental factor that would have prevented continued shooting. The final photograph showed a particularly dramatic aurora curtain stretching across the entire sky, suggesting that conditions remained excellent for photography when whatever incident occurred took place. Search efforts expanded to include helicopter overflights equipped with thermal imaging technology, ground teams using trained search dogs, and underwater search specialists who examined the lake near where Samantha's camera was found. The search covered more than 100 square miles of tundra, utilizing techniques developed specifically for Arctic search and rescue operations, where vast distances and extreme weather conditions create unique challenges. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Samantha herself was ever discovered, leaving investigators with more questions than answers about her final hours in the Arctic wilderness. The investigation attracted attention from Samantha's substantial online following, with her blog subscribers and social media followers organizing their own research efforts to analyze her final posts and GPS data for any clues that professional searchers might have overlooked. Online investigators noted anomalies in her final photographs, including unexplained light sources that did not appear to be consistent with aurora phenomena. Though image analysis experts could not conclusively determine whether these represented technical artifacts or actual environmental conditions at the photography site. Local Inupiaq elders shared traditional knowledge about the dangers that could befall travelers in the Arctic landscape, including sudden weather changes, disorientation caused by the featureless terrain, and the psychological effects of extended exposure to the profound silence and isolation that characterize the tundra environment. The elders emphasized that even experienced outdoors people could encounter conditions that proved fatal within minutes, particularly during the transitional seasons when ice conditions and weather patterns could change rapidly. The search for Samantha Harding was officially suspended after 2 weeks, though North Slope Borough authorities maintained the case as an active missing persons investigation. Her family established a scholarship fund supporting Arctic research and traditional knowledge preservation, while her blog posts from Utqiagvik continued to serve as educational resources about Inupiaq culture and the challenges facing Arctic communities. The mystery of her disappearance became part of the folklore surrounding Alaska's vast wilderness, a reminder that even the most prepared adventurers must respect the power of forces beyond human control in America's final frontier. Today, Samantha's story serves as both inspiration and warning for adventure travelers seeking authentic experiences in remote destinations. Her respectful documentation of Inupiaq culture and her obvious preparation for Arctic travel demonstrate the careful approach required for responsible exploration, while her disappearance underscores the reality that Alaska's wilderness can claim even those who understand and respect its dangers. The northern lights continue to dance over the tundra where she vanished, witnessed now by the few travelers bold enough to venture into the Arctic darkness, carrying with them the sobering knowledge that some who seek to capture nature's most spectacular displays may become part of the landscape they came to document.